Let us get down to business. President Trump says he is now going to impose 50% tariffs on a range of Canadian goods. It is set to go into effect 30 days from now. The administration says this is in response to Canada's unfair discrimination against American cars, alcohol, and dairy products. Meanwhile, the Prime Minister of Canada says the new tariffs are in direct violation of the trade agreement between the two countries and Mexico. Seth Harris joins us, former acting labor secretary under President Obama, and Dan Nathan, co-founder of Risk Reversal and a CNBC Fast Money contributor. His latest podcast is out today, and I promise it is a great one. Okay, Seth, what is going to be the broader economic impact of these tariffs, especially when Americans are already dealing with higher prices from the original tariffs, but more importantly, from the war in Iran?
It's going to make a bad situation worse. Canada is the U.S.'s second biggest trading partner. Mexico is our first biggest trading partner. And now the president has said on a range of products that we are going to pay 50% or something less than that more for Canadian goods. You know, the number, Steph, you've done a great job covering the fact that the number one issue in America right now for working families, for voters generally, is affordability. So don't listen to what Donald Trump says. Watch closely what he does. This is a public policy move that will increase prices and probably inch up inflation because we depend on Canada for important products like building materials, cement, plywood, other things that are used in building housing. The number one cost for America's families is housing, and we have a housing shortage in America. If we're going to address that housing shortage, we need to build more houses. And now that's going to be more costly because of Donald Trump's tariffs on Canada. It is bad public policy.
Is Canada, Seth, engaging in unfair trade practices in any way, the way the president says they are?
Well, what they did was to retaliate against the United States for Donald Trump's first round of tariffs against them. You know, we're not supposed to be having these kinds of trade wars with our two biggest trading partners, Mexico and Canada. We have an agreement, the USMCA, that, by the way, was negotiated by Donald Trump. So this is him critiquing his own work and finding it wanting, and now wanting to go to war with one, at least go to economic war with, or maybe literal war with one of our neighbors while he's negotiating with the other neighbor. You know, maybe this is some kind of four-dimensional chess negotiating tactic where he thinks if he beats up on Canada, he'll soften them up for the negotiations. What he's done instead is sort of stiffen the spines of the Canadians against the United States, made them angry, had Prime Minister Carney talking about partnerships with other trade partners around the world to reduce the dependence of Canada on the American economy. That's not what we need right now. We need more integration with Mexico and Canada. We need to raise living standards in Mexico and in Latin America. That will help to deal with the immigration issue, but also it will result in our having better markets. And that's the goal of all of this.
No one has made Mark Carney look like this much of a badass, tough guy as Donald Trump has. I'm so naive that on Sunday when I saw these two at the World Cup, I'm like, oh my gosh, everything must be great. Clearly I was wrong. How do you see this playing out?
Yeah, I don't think he expected to be, challenged by a strong leader from Canada. And that's what Mark Carney has actually emerged as. And, the thing that I'm most worried about is that tariff that they're putting on hockey sticks. I mean, that seems to be something that is going to be, it just seems very performative if you think about it. And I'm joking, obviously. But when you think about, Trump went to Beijing and there was a lot of issues, but this is back in April, right? To talk about. And it was tariffs was a big one here. And when you think about, and Seth just said this, the fact that they are going about this with our largest trading partners in our own hemisphere that are our allies, and they have not gone as hard as they have with China. Now, you have to go all the way back to April 2025, and they put these big fentanyl tariffs and some other, I guess, punitive sort of ones.
Mm-hmm.
But, the stock market reacted to that. You remember the stock market dropped 20%, I want to say, in a matter of weeks like that. And that obviously taught the administration a big lesson that is very focused on the S&P 500, the largest index of stocks, 500 of them that trade here, right? And they have a lot of exposure overseas. So when you think about this round of tariffs, what that means, we have the tariffs from 2025 to deal with. We have new tariffs right now. We have the inflationary pressures of the war. And when you think about, I think the administration's kind of feeling it. They got this good inflation report for June. A lot of that had to do with oil coming down because of the ceasefire.
Which is back up.
Which is going to go back up.
Okay, new topic. A judge has put a 2-week pause on the $110 billion Paramount-Warner Brothers merger over concerns that it might violate antitrust laws. Do you think that this deal could actually get blocked, or this is just temporary, gumming things up, going to delay it? I mean,
one of the most interesting things about that World Cup final is Ted Sarandos, who is the
Netflix.
CEO of Netflix, was in the box with the Kushners and the Trumps and everything like that and chatting up with him. Now, Ted Sarandos is the CEO, obviously, in Netflix. They were bidding for Warner Brothers. They got outbid by Paramount. Ted Sarandos went to the White House and he came out, this is a few months ago, and said they're pulling their bid and giving it to Paramount. So the president was obviously, fairly persuasive as it relates to that. One other thing about this deal, when you talk about is it going to go through, there's what they call a ticking clause going in. If the deal is not done by September 30th, they basically have to pay shareholders of Warner another 25 cents per share. Now,
who have been paid a whole lot of money already.
That's right. So, does this, is there an opportunity for Netflix to get back in there? Maybe.
Okay, Seth, the federal government has already signed off on this deal. This was beloved by this White House. What would it take? What would it mean if the states win? What actually would things look like?
Well, you would have more competition in the entertainment market, which is what antitrust law exists to accomplish, right? The heart and soul of capitalism is competition, because that's what holds down prices and makes sure that resources go to the right places, gives everybody a fair shot to succeed. When you have consolidation like this gigantic merger of 2 of the last 5 legacy studios in Hollywood, you reduce competition, you drive down wages, you have fewer opportunities, prices go up for consumers. It's a bad thing, and that's why we have the Clayton Antitrust Act. So I don't think we should take too seriously the White House and the puppets at the Justice Department signing off on this deal, because, there's a lot of political influence involved in that. Larry Ellison, who's a part of the famous Ellison family, his dad is very close with Trump. Larry Ellison himself is very close with Trump. They lobbied Trump to support them succeeding in this deal rather than Netflix succeeding in this deal. So I'm taking the lead, frankly, of the entertainment unions in Hollywood, all of whom are against this deal because they think it's going to be fewer opportunities, fewer jobs, lower wages, less diverse content, fewer voices in our entertainment infrastructure. It'll be interesting to see what this judge does. It would take a lot of courage for this judge to stand up and say, I'm going to permanently enjoin this deal. We're going to have to see if that happens.
The big lie is looming large over today's Arizona primaries, with election deniers on the ballot for the state's most powerful offices. Republican Congressman Andy Biggs, who refused to certify the 2020 race, is the party's frontrunner in the GOP primary for governor. And the races for Secretary of State and Attorney General both include candidates who have talked about the election being stolen from Trump. But, as you are about to hear, some voters in the state, they are pretty tired of relitigating that race.
What do you make of hearing politicians talk about 2020 fraud claims?
It's bullshit. We can count the vote, and we should allow everybody to vote and make sure everything is counted honestly, and I don't believe in rigged.
Get over it. You lost. Get over it. You're like a child.
It's like, come on, that's foolishness, and no, that's just a waste of time, and I don't like that.
It's sad that someone that doesn't win just claims that it was all a sham. But if he would have won, would he have also claimed it was a sham? Probably not.
Joining me now, MS Now senior White House reporter Vaughn Hilliard and Brian Tyler Cohen, political commentator and host of the podcast No Lie with Brian Tyler Cohen. He has millions of subscribers. He's also the author of The Day After, How to Wield Power in a Post-Trump World. It is good to see you both, Vaughn. I am always happy when you get to be our Arizona correspondent. You spent a lot of time there.
I wish I was there right now.
I know. But you know what? We're going to connect the dots because what happened in Arizona sort of led you to where you are right now. What can you tell us about these candidates? They're all over the ballot.
Right. First, on the Democratic side, the slate of incumbents are running again. You have Chris Mays for Attorney General, Adrian Fontes for Secretary of State, and Katie Hobbs for Governor. And so the question here in today's primary is, who are each of these folks going to run against in the Republican side? And when you look at Andy Biggs, he is leading substantially in the polls. We expect him to win tonight. He is one of those Arizona congressmen that objected to the certification of Arizona's results on January 6, 2021. But he was also somebody in text messages that was revealed through the January 6 committee proceedings to have to send text messages to Mark Meadows, the then chief of staff, just 3 days after the 2020 election, saying that there should be alternate slate of electors. And Mark Meadows replied, "I love it." He was somebody who is a proponent of the idea that Vice President Mike Pence should reject the electors that were there on January 6 and instead put forward those that had backed Donald Trump. And then Alex Collin, Secretary of State, he was somebody that was actually a lawyer that was part of that Kraken lawsuit that was fronted by Sidney Powell, somebody who has called for essentially the complete end of mail-in voting, and somebody who is expected to win here tonight. Again, this is really just thrusting election deniers at the forefront of the Republican Party in Arizona.
Well, and the thing is, Brian, that has huge consequences, because you think back to 2020, there were election officials in Arizona who were willing to stand firm against the president's demands to say that there was no fraud. What would it mean if suddenly the people in charge, all levels of government, the governor, the secretary of state, the attorney general, if they are willing to buy into Trump's claims?
Well, look, it would allow Trump the ability to do what he's been trying to do all along, which is to have basically full federal control to interfere in elections as he pleases. And this is clearly a huge priority for him. That's why he's invested so much time and energy into trying to pass the Save America Act, which basically amounts to a federal takeover of elections. It's why he tried to pass that executive order banning mail-in voting. That was blocked. It's why he refuses to rule out sending ICE to the polls. His top priority is just doing whatever he can to basically be able to take control of elections. And the sad part of all of this is he wouldn't need to do all of this if he bothered to just keep true to his own promises on the campaign trail. But he won't. He won't do anything to bring prices down. He won't do anything to release the Epstein files. He won't do anything to avoid foreign wars. And so instead, because he's not willing to earn people's votes, he has to try and rig the rules of the game in his favor.
Help me understand, Juan, just the politics of this. You have Congressman Biggs asked 3 times about the 2020 election outcome. He told USA Today he would not be pitted against Trump, who remains, of course, wedded to these unsubstantiated allegations. What is the strategy there? Like, who in the base is he trying to appeal to by not putting distance between himself and Trump?
He knows that Kari Lake lost by 17,000 votes 4 years ago. And Kari Lake ran on election denialism, and there was a few weeks back in the 2022 campaign where she tried to, you could say, moderate or focus on issues like the economy and water rights, but then she time and again lifted up people like Steve Bannon and Charlie Kirk onto the campaign stage, and who were making the case that Donald Trump was the rightful winner. And Andy Biggs is somebody who shares a very similar record, and that is a recognition and an acknowledgement that in a general election he's going to have to change, because time and again there have been more Democrats elected statewide since the 2020 election than Republicans. And if Andy Biggs wants to win, he's got to change his tenor. The last rally that I was at with Andy Biggs, a Trump rally, he referred to himself and others in the crowd as the ultra MAGA-ers. The question is, most of Arizona, they're not ultra MAGA-ers. Can he win back those old school traditional conservatives and the independent voters that now time and again in recent elections have gone towards Democrats?
Right, and how many people, like the folks we were listening to in that parking lot, are actually turned off by the fact that they are so stuck on 2020. Brian, Arizona has been battling the Trump administration over election rules. I want you to take a listen to the current Secretary of State, Adrian Fontes, reacting to demands from the DHS Secretary about purging non-citizens from voter rolls.
He can go suck on a salt lick. The guy has no idea what he's talking about. Professional election administrators like myself are really, I'm sick and tired of being insulted by these folks who are completely ignorant as to how these systems work. I don't know what these folks are talking about. It's a perpetuation of the campaign of grievance that Donald Trump has continued on. And maybe he's setting something up to try to make some excuses for what might be happening in the fall.
Brian Tyler Cohen, my fellow New Jerseyan, I thought we knew colorful language, but I got to give it to the Arizonans because
Suck on a Salt Lick was definitely not on my bingo card today, but I love that one. I'll be borrowing that one.
I'm curious, two things. One is just how ugly you think this can get, and I've been thinking about this question in the context of your book about the fact that we are now in a period where everything is on the defensive, right? And we're trying to make sure that they do not reduce the number of people who are able to participate in our elections. But it's like we're living in the upside down, Brian, right? Where it's like we should be having a conversation about how we make it easier for people to vote and how you include more people in the democratic process. When we get there, how do you make sure this never happens again?
I think that this is the perfect example of what it looks like in terms of the asymmetry between how the two sides wield power. Obviously, Donald Trump is wielding it so that he can consolidate more control for himself. He's doing it so that he can engage in more self-enrichment. He's doing it so that his family can continue to consolidate these military defense contracts. And so this should be a lesson to Democrats that this asymmetry in terms of how the two parties wield power is completely unacceptable, and that if and when Democrats get into power again, they should learn a lesson from this. Watch the way in which Donald Trump is not adhering blindly to norms and traditions and institutions and processes, but instead doing it to get whatever he wants. Now, my contention, what I argue in this book, is that Democrats need to do this to deliver on virtuous outcomes, to make sure that they barrel through these obstacles and hurdles so that they can deliver on health care, on climate change legislation, on voting rights legislation, you name it. But right now, I think that the extent to which Trump is willing to just abuse any power he has, but to do it for himself, can't be overstated.
Pete Hegseth is full of himself and full of it. You've mismanaged the money in the budget that the Congress has already given you. The fact that you're coming back and asking for another $67 billion and are proposing a $1+ trillion budget for next year, you are full of it. We'll talk a little bit later what can be done with some of that money. But the reality of it is, Senator, he can't answer the question because he has mismanaged the budget. There's 17+ troops who are dead on his watch. That's not accounted for. The use of munitions, the use of strategy, the lack of strategy. How does he come before the committee and justify this? What was your take today? How do you see this playing out? Because I can't see any Republicans that I once knew sitting there thinking that this fool actually made sense in this request today, given the money that's already been spent to what? To what end? What are we seeing? What do we see for this money?
So two things. First of all, just the context. This is a war of choice. We were not under any threat from Iran. And it has been an unmitigated disaster in terms of loss of life, in terms of who's bearing the costs. My farmers, my constituents who can't afford to fill their fuel tanks, and farmers can't afford to buy fertilizer. The Strait of Hormuz now choked up. It was open before we went in. All of the political goals they've expressed, they've made no progress on. We're in worse shape now that this war has been commenced than we were before it began. But on the question that I asked Secretary Hegseth, which was about the deadliest day in this war so far, March 1st, when we lost six service members and dozens more were significantly and severely injured. We were unprepared. And there's been recent reporting from many of the troops that survived that attack about the fact that they asked for additional air defense, that they asked for medical preparedness in case, and were denied those requests. And he either wasn't briefed on that and didn't know that they were denied.
A form of mismanagement.
Right. Unprepared. Or worse yet, is covering it up. And all in this context, they're asking for tens of billions of dollars more for this war of choice. Americans want it to come to an end.
Senator, I think the way you characterize it is very important because it is a war of choice. And this is not a war that has been authorized by Congress at all. There is no authorization for the use of military force. This is being done unilaterally by the executive branch. Speaker of the House Mike Johnson was asked about that today. I want to play what he said, please.
The administration is working very hard. The commander-in-chief and the whole Department of War, they're working very hard to bring this to a resolution. There's a lot of discussions about how that will be done. We're all closely watching those developments, of course. I don't think an AUMF is in order right now. I think we need to bring this to a resolution.
We need to bring this to a resolution without congressional involvement, essentially neutering the legislative branch. We do have some reporting, though, from Notice that Senate Republicans are now pushing for more of a say in the Iran war. Several lawmakers said Monday that Congress should no longer remain on the sidelines. The White House needs to explain where the conflict is headed. Quote, I think it is clear that it is time for Congress to act, Senator Curtis said, and that doesn't mean that it's necessarily acting, constraining the president, but in fact defining what this looks like. 17 service members dead, billions upon billions upon billions of dollars in a country, frankly, that is hurting this economy. A lot of people can't make ends meet. Do you think that your Republican colleagues have the fortitude to actually have a real honest debate about this war?
Well, let me point out a couple of obvious things. One is they have not come to Capitol Hill until today and one other appearance to take questions in public, the administration, about this war. That's outrageous, given the loss of life, given the expenditures related. I also want to get to one point you made, that obviously this war is not authorized by Congress, but both houses have now gone on record with a majority saying that this conflict must end absent congressional authorization. A majority of both houses passed a concurrent resolution saying that. And so we've got to bear that in mind. Do I trust my Republican colleagues to act responsibly and to do what Congress is called upon to do at this moment? Well, I've been very disappointed that they haven't in large number thus far. But I always have hope that they will understand that we are a branch of government that is the one that declares war. We're the ones with the power of the purse strings. We need to use those powers to hold this administration to account.
So, keep hope alive.
Well, as the late great Reverend Jesse Jackson would say. Well, to the point you just made then, I mean, coming into this segment, we played that sound from the secretary, who is underscoring that, like, Democrats don't want to fund the military. And I think previously, which I don't think is true, to be very clear, but I think previously a claim like that would have grown legs. But we can all see with our own eyes. We have heard we've heard the mischaracterizations from, I mean, Pete Hegseth a couple months ago, didn't we obliterate Iran's nuclear capability? Yeah. Right. And then we still went to war with Iran, and now we done obliterated it again and again, but yet they are still bombing us. It's not making sense. And so the people can see that. Are Democrats and some Republicans, though, prepared to say, we aren't funding any of this because we need a full accounting of what's going on in this war? We still haven't even spoken about the war crimes, allegedly, that this administration is committing in Iran by bombing civilian infrastructure. Are folks prepared to really hold firm on this?
Yes. And let me just remind some conversations we've had before on this. There's a group of us in the Senate who have come repeatedly to the floor of the Senate weekly to say, to present a war powers resolution and to say, go on record. Do you support this or not? Then last week, we took the nearly unprecedented move of saying we are not moving the National Defense Authorization Act forward. We will at some point, but not right now while this war is going on. And so there's a lot of folks drawing a line in the sand. But back to your point about, do Democrats support funding our troops, funding defense? Right now, in our current fiscal year, the Defense Department reached nearly $1 trillion in funding. That was a significant increase for this current fiscal year.
I mean, the claim is a lie.
Right?
Can we just the claim is a bunch of BS. It's a lie.
Right. That's right. That's right.
Two proudly right-wing, self-proclaimed misogynists who become some of the most powerful influencers of the so-called manosphere, Andrew Tate and his brother Tristan, were arrested in Miami on Saturday on the way to a bare-knuckle boxing event. You see them there in the purple. That's Andrew Tate. They're now awaiting possible extradition to England under what British authorities call pending ongoing legal proceedings. While the men were already both facing charges in England, which they deny, the Crown Prosecution Service announced the following, quote, Andrew Tate is being charged with 7 further counts of rape, 3 counts of arranging or facilitating trafficking for sexual exploitation, 3 counts of assault occasioning actual bodily harm, and 19 additional charges for offenses relating to indecent images of a child and extreme pornography. Tristan Tate is being charged with 1 count of sexual assault, 2 counts of rape, and 3 counts of arranging or facilitating trafficking for sexual exploitation. The brothers have long denied all charges against them in every country investigating them. In a statement, their lawyer said, quote, the world knows Andrew and Tristan Tate are innocent. They have something of a storied legal history. Early last year, they were effectively kind of living in a kind of exile in Romania. They couldn't leave the country because they were under criminal prosecution. There was an investigation there into multiple allegations against the 2 men, including human trafficking, coercing women to pornography, and an allegation that Andrew had sex with a 15-year-old, beating her with a belt and choking her until she passed out. That's per the New York Times. The New Yorker reports that one 15-year-old told Romanian investigators that during sex, quote, even though I asked Andrew to stop, he continued. Again, both brothers deny any criminal activity at all. But as the New York Times also reports, the brothers had cultivated relationships with many people in Trump's inner circle, including his sons Barron and Don Jr., as well as Trump's former personal attorney, Alina Habba, and conservative media personalities like Tucker Carlson, who interviewed the brothers quite favorably. The Times reports that the Trump special envoy, Rick Grenell, also in the Trump circle, even discussed the Tate's case with 2 Romanian officials in 2024 after Trump won, and then early 2025 as he was preparing to take office. Now, Grenell denies having a substantive conversation about the Tates, though that would seem to indicate they did talk about it. For the Trump's part, neither Don Jr. nor the White House gave the Times comment on the Tate's relationship with Trump's oldest and youngest sons. The White House told the Times it is not involved in anything related to the Tate's legal matters. But here's the thing. The brothers started to get some good news not long after Trump won the 2024 election. They're sitting in Romania. They can't leave. Quote, I had word from the Trump admin that they're on top of things, Andrew Tate wrote to someone close to him in a message reviewed by the New York Times. I've been told I'll be free soon, but Trump needs to see me in Miami, he added. And sure enough, soon after, in February of 2025, the Romanian government, again, which had these sort of pending allegations against them, said, actually, they're free to go. They can leave the country. And immediately they did. In fact, they came to Florida. That's the same state, of course, where a Trump ally once granted a generous deal to another man accused of human trafficking, Jeffrey Epstein. President Trump says he knows nothing about the conditions of the Tate's travel ban in Romania being lifted. Alina Habba denied any role as well. But what happened was Trump got elected. They got let out of Romania. They came back to the U.S. But the brothers' legal team appears to have borrowed a strategy from Trump world, telling reporters after hearing yesterday that the Tates are facing a witch hunt, that the cases against them in Romania and the UK are essentially a kind of fabrication. Brothers also remain apparently well connected in some right-wing circles. In fact, just days before their arrest in Miami, the British tabloid The Daily Mail reported the Tates were spotted around Washington, D.C. as guests of a Trump friend, associate, the special envoy Paolo Zampoli. The Tates even apparently took a photo, you see there, with Texas Republican Congressman Wesley Hunt. Both the Daily Mail and MS Now reached out to Hunt's office, and we have not heard back. Megan Twohey is an investigative reporter for the New York Times, where she's extensively covered the Tate brothers, and she joins me now. The legal trail here is complicated because it involves multiple jurisdictions. There were cases being sort of pursued in the UK and in Romania. But walk us through what happened, what development happened in the UK's possible prosecution to prompt the arrest and the attempt of an extradition.
Yeah. So this week really was a significant turning point with regards to the Tates and the legal investigations of them. Up until Saturday, up until this weekend, they had been under criminal investigation in Romania, and there had been several charges of rape and human trafficking authorized by British prosecutors. But there had been this agreement that the prosecutors, that the British prosecutors wouldn't move forward until the Romanians were done with their investigation, with their criminal case. And then the brothers would be extradited from Romania to the UK. Now, what clearly has happened in recent weeks is that the British prosecutors have charged them with new crimes, alleged crimes. They are now, they had previously charged them with rape and assault and human trafficking, and now they've brought additional charges of rape, sex trafficking, and significantly those seemingly pornography, including a child pornography charge. And with those new charges, they have issued an extradition request to the United States because the Trumps have, since they were released from Romania, been traveling around the world. They resumed their their jet-setting lifestyle. They've been in Dubai, they've been in Turkey, and they've been returning to the United States. Notably, they have not gone back to the UK. And so an extradition request came in from the UK to the United States, to the Justice Department, saying, we're authorizing these new charges, and we would like you guys to issue a warrant for their arrest and extradite them back to the UK. And the federal officials here in the United States complied. So since their arrest on Saturday that you've seen images of, they have been in federal detention in Miami, and federal prosecutors have been basically arguing the case for extradition in court there. And the Tates are fighting that. Their lawyers are continuing to say this is all just politically motivated and that they're completely innocent of any crimes.
A little context here that I feel like is important for folks that don't know. I mean, Andrew Tate particularly developed an enormous following online, particularly with young men. Obviously, connections to people in Trump's orbit. They became a kind of cause célèbre of conservatives. I just saw a video today of the late Charlie Kirk talking about how people should listen to what Andrew Tate says about an overly feminized society. And also, I mean, this is sort of key context, like the whole thing that they marketed, and in some ways would charge people for, was to learn how to develop tools of psychological manipulation and coercion so as to get women to do sex work for you that you could make money off, essentially, right? I mean, that was a huge part of what their whole public profile was.
Yes, it was. I mean, what was sort of interesting and remarkable about them is that they basically created a business and helped gain followers of young men by bragging about the fact that they had operated an online porn business and by saying that they had actually exploited women and coerced them into participating in that porn business and that they would take most of the profits. They sold online courses to that extent, saying, there was one course that was called the Pimping Hose degree, where they said, listen, we're going to teach you the kind of tricks of the trade that we've used to exploit women and make money off of them. And so that really kind of wove that into their public image as they gained followers, not just for these online courses, but just a broader online following of young men who were attracted not just to their kind of financial savvy and their brazen masculinity and misogyny, but to some of the broader messages that they were bringing about the need for men to kind of regain their place in society and to push women down. And as they did this, they made these very sort of strategic, mutually beneficial alliances into the American right, even as criminal allegations of trafficking and rape multiplied against them, both in Romania and in the UK. We also learned that they had been under investigation here in the United States by anti-trafficking agents, as well as prosecutors in the Justice Department. But in spite of this, their messaging and the way that they connected with particularly a young male demographic that became crucial to Trump's, return to power, they were able to make strategic alliances with people in the Trump family, from Don Jr. to Barron Trump. We were able to show was communicating with Andrew Tate by Zoom as recently as 2024 when the presidential race was going on. They talked about the criminal case against them in Romania at the time and how they both agreed that it wasn't substantial or wasn't legitimate. The Tates have also made alliances with Trump advisors from, Richard Grenell, who you mentioned, who was the special diplomatic envoy who discussed the Tates once Trump was after he was reelected, and then, took entered his second administration. Grenell had conversations he wasn't just sort of publicly supporting the Tates, he was also having conversations with Romanian political figures about their case. And so it was, and they also had these, formed these alliances with people like Tucker Carlson as he was leaving Fox and trying to build his new audience and his new show. He went to Romania and sat down with Tate while he was first indicted in Romania. And basically, it was a very warm, friendly interview in which they actually misrepresented the criminal charges against him.
Yeah, and we should just, note that if folks want to learn more, that you're great reporting in the New York Times. There's an incredible piece in the New Yorker as well. And just to note that there are, again, these are allegations and or charges. They are not proven, and the two men deny them. But there are multiple people, both named and anonymous, who accuse them of rape, violent rape, physical abuse, sexual coercion, essentially grooming underage girls for sex work and streaming it. I mean, it's a very long list of accusations here. If people want to learn more about them, this is not something that came out of nowhere. I think it's fair to say at this point, even as they were establishing these relationships and getting the friendly interviews with Tucker Carlson. Megan Twohey, who's been doing amazing reporting on this beat, her work is in the New York Times on the latest twist and turn here. Thank you, Megan. Appreciate it.
Now, of course, you're hearing some talk about an upcoming midterm election, not even a presidential election, where we're supposed to back down, cave to Iran, give them an MOU where they get $500 billion and become the most powerful country in the entire region. It's fascinating. We'll see which direction it goes. We tried to bribe them. Make no mistake of it. The Trump administration tried to bribe Iran with $500 trillion after worrying about after worrying about $1 billion or $2 billion of cash on pallets. The Trump administration tried to bribe Iran to the tune of $500 billion. $500 billion. That was more than Kaiser Wilhelm II had to pay for Germany after World War I. Would have been catastrophic, not only for our U.S. interests, but our allies' interests in that region, if we had gone ahead and bribed Iran. And they'd actually been smart enough to take the bribe. Thank God they weren't. To talk about this and much more, let's bring in the co-host of our 8 a.m. hour, staff writer of The Atlantic, Jonathan Lemire, also co-host of The Rest is Politics, the BBC's Caddy K, MSNBC National Affairs analyst John Heilemann. He's partner and chief political columnist at Puck, and also the host of Politics Nation on MS Now, Reverend Al Sharpton. He is the president of the National Action Network. And, Jonathan Lemire, far be it from me to be the guy that's talking about wanting to be in forever wars. I most certainly do not. In fact, we were very clear. I was very clear that I thought going into Iran was a mistake. But just as that was a terrible mistake, we can't make another terrible mistake on how we get out of Iran. And if we get out of Iran, playing right into Iran's hands, as some people are suggesting in the Republican Party, that, we have to worry about a midterm election. So we're going to give you everything you want. We're going to let you keep your nukes. We're going to let you keep your ballistic missiles and actually build even more without any limitations. We're going to pay you $500 billion to become the most powerful country in that entire region and to terrorize our friends day and night and to terrorize the United States. We're going to do all of that because we have a 2-year election coming up in a couple months. Again, I understand the political concerns domestically, but internationally, it would be a nightmare to cave to a terror state for political reasons.
Yeah, the president is in a bind of his own making, and it is a proud tradition for the hardliners in Tehran to humiliate American commanders-in-chief, and we're seeing that yet again. This was a war that President Trump thought could be over in whether it's days or a handful of weeks at most. And now it has dragged along, and we've seen the real economic impact of it. He is someone who has been casting about desperately for months now to get out of this, including tended that MOU of a couple months back that even at the time, a lot of Republicans were very skeptical of, and many observers, including us, skeptical that it would hold. It has not. And now Iran is emboldened, and they have shown the ability to flex their muscles to open and close the Strait of Hormuz, more attacks on ships going through. We learn more about American casualties and American fatalities, soldiers killed in bases in Jordan and elsewhere in the region. They've been able to really inflict might, and President Trump has blustered about this. Now, 10 straight days, we've hit Iran in some way, but there's some early intel analysis that suggests not really making much of a difference. So therefore, he is in a bind, John Heilemann, as to the way forward. He's desperate to not call it a war. He doesn't want this to be officially hostilities back on. Yet he's also, as Joe just said, in a really impossible situation, because the only way to stop the fighting is to more or less cave to the current position, the status quo, which includes Iran being empowered and being in control of the Strait of Hormuz, which is unacceptable to the other countries in the region. And they've made that clear to Washington, but also would have real detrimental impact, including gas prices rising ahead of the midterms.
I think I'm not sure what definition of war would apply under which we haven't been at war since February. Even in the period of time when we had the ceasefire, there was never really the fire never really ceased, and we're now exchanging volleys of artillery almost every night, Jonathan. It's like, I think for most Americans who look up and see, it's had a couple more Americans service deaths. We've seen that there have been revised estimates as to how many injuries there have been over the course of the war. I don't think there's anybody in America who, if you went and asked them, are we at war with Iran right now, wouldn't say the answer to that question is yes. And that's the real challenge for Donald Trump right now, is that the question is whether we're in a hot war, whether we're in a war that seems to be winding down or seems to be winding up. And right now, the war seems to be escalating, and that is bad politically for his party. I mean, I think the biggest problem here, and Rev, we could kick this around, but it's this war was a mistake from the very beginning. And the choices that the president now faces are choices that were eminently clear from the moment we entered. He does face, as Jonathan says, a great conundrum is how to figure out how to get out without doing long-term damage to the U.S. interests. But it's all self-inflicted.
He probably is a victim of his own misreading what was going on. Let's remember, he became involved in this when there were thousands and thousands of people in Iran marching against the regime. And he sort of thought he would come in and ride the wave of let's topple them. I can do it in 7 days. He apparently had no real thought out strategy of what happens if the crowds are not there. What happens if the people don't topple? And I'm not riding a wave, but I have to provide the basis of it. He didn't have a strategy. It wasn't thought out. It was, I'm going to ride the wave. I'm going to look better than Obama. And then all of a sudden, the crowds were not overtaking Iran. And then he had to come in and try to do a quick military move, kill people, including their supreme leader. And that didn't work. There was no long-term strategy. There was no what if, what might happen, then what, no plan A, B, or C. And he's caught out there hanging now. And no matter which way he goes, he's moving at deep risk. But more importantly, he's putting the United States in that, which we're paying at the gas prices to begin with. We don't know where this could lead the American public as we go into the midterm elections.
Well, and Caddy, there's that phrase again, the midterm elections. If you're not interested in the political consequences directly in front of you, the midterm elections, then it seems to me the answer is pretty clear. There's not going to be a military solution, despite all of the saber rattling and the embarrassing tantrums the Secretary of Defense has made. And, of course, that only makes Donald Trump look weaker every time Pete Hegseth opens his mouth and tries to act tough. It just makes Donald Trump and the entire administration look weaker. But there's not a military solution to this, but there may be an economic solution. As you remember, everybody remembers before this war began, you actually had Iran hobbled by just a collapsing economy. That's why the protests were out there. And so over time, if you're not staring at the gas pumps, and if you're not staring at elections that are coming up in the next few months, if you take a long-term view of this, then it seems quite simple. Iran can be hobbled, but they can only be hobbled economically and brought to their knees economically. If the president's willing to do that, take a chance on actually not looking directly in front of him, then he has an opportunity to build a legacy, not by dropping bombs, but by squeezing Iran economically until they finally have to give up.
Yeah, there are probably both economic and diplomatic solutions to this, Joe, but they take two things that have been missing so far. One is patience and the other is expertise. And so far, we haven't seen either of those. OK, a lot has been happening in the last few hours. So let's get everyone up to date on the overnight strikes. The U.S. and Iran traded for the 10th consecutive night. The continued attacks come hours after President Trump responded to the deaths of U.S. service members by warning on social media, quote, every time Iran kills an American soldier, they will pay for that killing many times over. The Pentagon has now identified the two fallen soldiers in Jordan as 25-year-old First Lieutenant Tyler James Feehan of Hawaii and 19-year-old Private Isabella Gonzalez of Texas, the youngest service member to be killed since the war began. Private Gonzalez finished high school just over a year ago and joined the Army after graduation. Her former roommate told the New York Times, quote, she was always dancing all the time, especially if I woke up and I was in a bad mood, she would start dancing. Lieutenant Feehan, described by friends to the Times as charismatic, competitive, and a leader, had graduated from Southern Utah University and was just weeks away from earning an MBA from the school. The Army said Lieutenant Feehan would receive the Bronze Star and the Combat Action Badge and that he would be posthumously promoted to captain. Meanwhile, nearly 100 American service members have suffered some level of injury since July the 7th, as the U.S. and Iran ramped up those attacks. That's according to Pentagon spokesman Sean Parnell, who added the vast majority of those injuries were minor concussions, and most members have returned to duty. This update from the Pentagon comes after the New York Times reported that in the week leading up to the Iranian attack in Jordan that killed the 2 U.S. soldiers and left one missing, Iran carried out 3 other strikes against U.S. forces in the country. Officials tell the Times those attacks injured dozens of U.S. service members and damaged several helicopters. The paper adds the Pentagon had not disclosed the earlier strikes, nor the casualties and damage they inflicted. Parnell pushed back and denied any concealment, calling such claims fabrications. As for the fighting, well, Iran once again responded to the U.S. strikes, targeting U.S. bases in Bahrain, Kuwait and Jordan, and also attacked a tanker in the Strait of Hormuz, forcing its crew to abandon the ship. And as for how long this back and forth may continue, the Washington Post reports Iran's government is unlikely to feel significant impact or soften its negotiating position as a result of new rounds of U.S. military strikes. That's according to a new intelligence assessment described by current and former U.S. officials, who add that analysts at American spy agencies also have concluded Tehran and Washington are for now stuck in an indefinite limbo between peace and war.